Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be talking about the various different kinds of voices, which sometimes causes people a little bit of confusion. Let me just go through what the sort of standard four are. Well, first of all, the soprano, then the alto, the tenor, and the bass. So if you sing in a sort of standard choir, then you'd normally expect to find the sopranos, there's the top voices, then the altos, then the tenors, and then the basses. The sopranos are usually the ladies in the choir. The altos are also usually ladies, but there are some gentlemen who would sing the alto part. The tenors are normally the gentlemen, but there are some ladies who sing low and join the tenors. And the basses are normally the gentlemen as well. So that's how the four-part choir kind of works out. But we've also got some other voices that you might want to know about, and they are these. There's the mezzo soprano. Well, mezzo sort of means half a soprano. What does that mean? It doesn't mean they're only producing half the volume of the soprano, or they're only half the people the sopranos are. Doesn't mean that at all. It means it's a vocal range that sits between the soprano and the alto range. And actually, it's amazing how many people are really mezzo sopranos. So if you're a soprano who sings in a choir and you think, gosh, those top notes are a bit high for me, really. Well, that may be because you could use a little bit of help to produce those high notes with a bit more confidence, or it may be because you're really a mezzo soprano, you're sitting in between. Or it may be that you're a kind of genuine alto or contralto, but actually you haven't really quite got those bottom notes and you're quite happy at the top of that alto range. So that could be indicating that you're a mezzo soprano. So in other words, a voice that sort of comfortably, naturally sits between the soprano and the alto voice. And then we've got the same thing down here, because between the tenor and the bass, there's another voice that's known as the baritone. And the general thinking is actually that there are more baritones in the world than there are genuine tenors or basses. And sometimes this gets very finely tuned, because you've got some voices who are sort of higher baritones who end up joining the tenors, and you get some baritones that are lower baritones, they end up joining the basses. But the same thing happens, if you're a baritone, you might just struggle a bit with the high notes of the tenor range, or you might struggle a bit with the low notes of the bass range. And another one to know about is this one that I've just put in brackets at the bottom, because it's a term that's sometimes used, the basso profondo. Now that's the kind of bass voice that's really low. Those basses where you sometimes hear a really deep speaking voice. And for some reason, often associated with Russians. We do talk about the Russian bass voice sometimes. It's the same kind of thing, really. But these are people who've got notes really comfortably off the bottom of the bass range, but probably are struggling even at the top of the bass range. So that's just an added voice down there. And you might be wondering why I've put all this stuff in here, because don't we really know these people as altos? Well, that's usually how they're referred to in a standard choir. Technically speaking, the ladies are actually contraltos. So that's the proper term for them. But I think we end up using alto as a kind of abbreviation of contralto, where the alto and I don't know why I've written counterpoint there, it's completely the wrong word, but let's change that to countertenor, which is what I meant to write. Dear oh dear. So the countertenor. So the alto or the countertenor are the male voices. So sometimes male voices can sing in this sort of falsetto voice. They can produce very high notes, and therefore they would be there really. So contralto really for the ladies, countertenor, alto really describing the gentleman in all of this. What are the vocal ranges? Because this is another thing that people ask about. How do I know what really are the comfortable bottom and top notes? Well, think of it this way, and it's only a rough guide, and you'll find many examples in music of things that are doing something different. But if you think of your sopranos going from middle C and then perhaps going up an octave and a fifth to G. So if the sopranos are running from middle C up to G, then we're talking about a range that goes from middle C there up to G there. Now, probably somebody will immediately say, well, I sing soprano and in our choir we're singing a piece that's got top A in it or even top C in it. As I say, that does happen. So you do sometimes find notes outside that range, but it's a sort of comfortable range for your sopranos, that C to G. And if you think of the tenors doing the same thing, so they're running C up to G as well, but obviously they're going to do this an octave lower. So they're going from that C, the C below middle C, up to this G here. That would be a standard tenor range. Again, there may be notes sitting slightly outside that, but that's their standard range. And when you get pieces of music that consistently go outside that range at the top or the bottom, singers usually feel it pretty quickly. Now, what are these contraltos, altos up to? Well, if you think about them as really starting at about G, okay, so that's kind of, giving you a fourth lower, and maybe going up to D, you see what's happening there? So the altos might be starting on that G, going up to that D. So you see how that's a sort of fourth lower than the sopranos. And again, they might well step outside that range by a note or two every now and again. And then you think of your basses doing the same thing. So they're kind of bottom G up to a D. So they're sitting there. That's quite a quick way of learning the standard voices. Just think, with sopranos have got an octave and a fifth from middle C. The tenors have got the same thing, an octave lower. Then just think about altos and basses are a fourth lower, as it were, than the sopranos and the tenors. You've got your standard range there. Okay, now what are the mezzos going to do? Well, they may just be, somewhere in between this. So you might have a mezzo who's going to go from, say, A, 3 notes below C, up to E, for example. But they may be kind of B up to F, but they're in between those voices. And you've got the same thing with the baritone, because remember I was saying that mezzos and baritones, they may be high. So a high mezzo is nearer soprano than contralto, or a low baritone is nearer bass than tenor. So they're sitting in between those vocal ranges. So it's just to clarify the standard 4 voices, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. They're things that you would see in a standard 4-part choir. But also, when things fill out a bit, we've got the mezzo soprano and the baritone. We may even beat the odd basso profondo. And we've also got these other names for things that cause confusion. What's the difference between a contralto, an alto, and a countertenor, But in terms of vocal range, those 3 are all roughly in the same place. So I hope that brings a little bit of clarity to the voice types that we might expect to meet.